The PlayStation 2's infamous red screen of death has been covered already on this channel. Recently, however, I received a surprise phone call from an old acquaintance where the topic eventually came up. Someone who was a friend and relative used to work as a professional game tester on and off while attending university from 1996 to 2000. The company for which she worked was a small outfit that tested video games for independent, obscure developers on the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 consoles. Giving her the pseudonym Jeannie, my acquaintance told me that, despite the explicit prohibition against doing so, Jeannie would occasionally smuggle out game discs and copy them at home for personal use. One of these games, according to her, was a very early version of Mother 3, the sequel to the Super NES game Earthbound, which had been developed for the abandoned Super NES CD-ROM. All the way back in 1988, the development of the Super NES CD-ROM started. It was presented at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1991. During the recorded phone call, however, we were incorrect about the timeline of its development. The deal between Nintendo and Sony went bad because Nintendo wanted a monopoly on the games produced for the system. Nintendo then struck a deal with Philips, who developed the CDI, which then also went badly. I am not sure if the original SNES-compatible PlayStation was compatible with the final version of the Sony PlayStation. That detail would have an awful lot of relevance as to the origin of this rumored game disc. The final version of Mother 3 was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2006 after many delays. After the original phone call, I asked my acquaintance if we could recreate the discussion for a recording to be used in this video. She agreed, upon the stipulation that I disguise her voice and omit any personally identifiable details. Tell us a little bit about how you got your hands on this game.
I guess I probably should start by saying that this was a prototype game and not meant for release.
Sure. Was this a development copy?
Yeah, one of several editions meant for testing. I'd say it wasn't even in beta, more like a limited alpha release just for the testers at the time. Anyway, probably ought to mention it was a close friend, sort of relative by marriage, but I'll leave it vague because they worked as a game tester at a small company that worked with indie game companies. This was, well, it was 2001 when I had the disc anyway. We'll call them Jeannie, don't want to use her real name.
They worked as a video game tester, basically playing video games for a living?
Right, exactly. I won't say where. Again, sorry, going to keep it vague for the recording.
No problem. Feel free to obscure the details to protect their identity.
The place she worked was small. Just some hole-in-the-wall office, really. But they had tight security because the test copies that they got would get leaked early on, so they had strict agreements after a while. That meant if you worked there, all your bags got searched. You'd be fired immediately if you got caught taking any of the games home. No cameras, no phones allowed, none of that.
Sounds like a fun place to work.
No, she liked it there. They just were really strict about some stuff. So this one game was an early version of an OG PlayStation game. Just want to clarify on that, this game was PS1, even though the PlayStation 2 was already out.
Ah, this was 2001, right?
Yeah, late 2001, actually right before, you know,
right.
Like, okay.
In September?
When I had the disc, yeah, just a few days prior. So we had her family in town, so she was staying with us for the week. Like I said, she wasn't allowed to take any of the games home, but she did sneak a few out and burn copies, right?
I see. She'd make the copies at home, not at the office.
And totally against company policy. But this was right around the time she was about to go back to school, so she was about to quit anyway. What I forgot to mention is that they could sue you too, so she still was doing something risky.
I can see how you get in a lot of trouble for that.
Yeah, you could. She knew. One of the games was a PS1 early alpha version for Mother 3, but I want to be crystal clear. This was not done by one Up studio. What ended up being Mother 3, released in, I think, 2006, that was a whole entirely different game.
And this was in 2001. I'm sure they weren't working on that game that early on.
No, this was something done by a completely different developer, which that company thought had all the licensing with Nintendo. All the legal stuff worked out, but that ended up not being true at all.
Huh.
It was 2001 when I got the disc from her. It was one of a few discs she copied from there. I'm not going to name the testing company for obvious reasons. That's also why I don't know how old that disc was.
Okay. To summarize, this family/friend worked at a video game testing company, and even though she got in a lot of trouble if caught, she managed to swipe some of the games they were testing and made copies at home since they didn't have the copy protection implemented. Alright?
Yeah.
And you had the games in your possession when she was visiting in 2001.
Right. She didn't leave them with me. She took them back with her when she went home.
And she didn't work at the company anymore at that time, right?
No, she didn't. She quit about a year prior.
So we don't know the age of the game disc or when the company obtained it.
Right.
Alright. And now that we have the backstory, tell us about the game itself.
Okay. The game was a never-released early version of Mother 3. It had a ton of bugs, and it took several tries to get it to start on my PlayStation 2. Some of the glitches may have been problems with the PS2's backwards compatibility.
Oh yeah! Side note, I've noticed some of those glitches in legit games. Xenogears has a really strange glitch where it'll play random sound effects in the background music when you play the game on the PS2.
Huh. So, like I said, this version of Mother 3 looked nothing like the one of the Game Boy Advance. This was for the PlayStation, like I mentioned, but it was still a 2D style, like Earthbound.
For those who don't know, Earthbound is also known as Mother 2.
Yep. This version looked very much like Earthbound, but had different characters. I can't remember, but the main character's name was not Lucas. I think the story was different.
Have you played Mother 3 and Earthbound?
Yes, they're some of my favorites. This was supposed to be an early version of Mother 3, and I remember her saying that it was an abandoned game they weren't actively testing.
Oh. She wasn't testing this game for her job.
No, she just grabbed the disc to copy it at home. It wasn't one she was ever assigned.
I'm surprised they didn't dispose of it. The company, I mean, they were just left it lying around.
Not sure exactly where it was in the office, just it was one she took.
And you got a chance to play it, which was pretty cool.
It took a few tries because it gave me the red error screen.
The red screen of death!
Yeah, red screen of death.
The game was playable to some extent?
It was. I played through maybe the first hour or two. It was definitely not what Mother 3 on the Advance ended up being.
Yeah.
And you might want to go more in depth on this in the video, but Sony and Nintendo had a huge falling out on the Super Nintendo CD-ROM back in 1994, I think.
Around then, yeah.
So the CD-ROM was canceled, pissed off Sony big time. They were trying to compete with the Sega CD.
I had one of those.
Then Sony, of course, made the PlayStation, I guess kind of based on the prototype, and Nintendo made the 64.
The Super Duper Nintendo.
And Nintendo's first CD-ROM games were on the CDI by Philips. You know, those Zelda games in the YouTube poops. Maybe the Mother 3 Alpha was something being cooked up by Nintendo and this small indie publisher. That's kind of what I was starting to think. She told me that Mother 3 had some other false starts, one of them being for the 64. They didn't test games for the 64 where she worked, just PlayStation 1 and 2. Mother 3 on the 64 started development in 94, delayed a bunch of times, then officially canceled.
I see.
Well, for the 64, around 2000 or early 2001, that was around the time she quit working for that testing company.
So we're starting to get a timeline here.
And the version I played was not 3D. It was 2D, just like Earthbound and the final Mother 3 on the Advance.
What were some of those other games?
I don't remember, honestly. They were games that were eventually released. She talked about an early version of Secret of Mana. Have you played that one?
Oh yeah, Secret of Mana is awesome.
Well, that was for the Super CD-ROM, too. Abandoned for the cartridge version.
Uh-huh. By the way, the remake's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. So here's where we start getting into creepypasta territory. True story, but I can't prove it. More like, this game froze the PS2 a lot, but it finally played, and when it played, it was fine. Not too many bugs in game, but some missing dialogue.
Is it in English?
Yeah, this was localized, which, come to think of it, I guess that in itself is weird. Localized in alpha.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know how all that works. Maybe partially localized for the testers? I wouldn't know.
Neither would I. Someone could probably explain that. Now, let's see this. I could play the game fine. It was fun. Kind of a shame this version didn't get released. It's what I noticed after she took the games back and I tried to play other games on my PS2.
Do you still have it? The PS2, I mean. I know you don't have the game.
No, the PS2 died on me a long time ago. It quit reading discs altogether.
Red screen of death all the time?
Yeah. But it's that the red screen of death, it changed after I played that abandoned version of Mother 3.
Okay, so what happened?
So every time I'd get that screen, which wasn't all the time, until the console actually started to die. It would look like the normal red screen of death at first, but if you let it play for a while, I swear to God, I swear it looked like Giygas, the final boss of Earthbound, would slowly fade in with the swirling red clouds.
Could have been pareidolia? You know, like seeing things in the clouds?
Maybe, but it was pretty clearly defined.
And you're sure?
I took a photo of it one time it happened. I'll send that over.
Sweet. Thanks. I'll put that in the video. And by the way, did your PlayStation 2 have a hard drive installed? I know it was possible to put a hard drive in them, but they have a bay for one. Usually that's for the Linux kit.
No, I didn't have anything like that. Just a modded PS2.
If you're sure the error screen changed, that is strange, because like I've mentioned in one of my other videos, all the data for the startup and menu screens, including the red screen of death, is stored in ROM, and I don't think it's possible to flash the PS2's firmware. At least not from the software read from the CD-ROM.
I think it was possible. There were some official updates on the original one, not the Slim, by the way. For the hard drive support, I know that one. They did that to add a file browser and to fix some bugs. Also very early on an update so you could play DVD movies. But after playing this game, if I left the red screen going too long, there's what looks to me like Giygas.
A game that changes the firmware. That almost sounds like a virus that gets into a computer's BIOS or UEFI.
It didn't seem to do anything malicious. It ran fine for years after that, just eventually wore out and stopped reading discs.
I'll have to take a look at that photo.
There's more to the story.
Ah, yeah.
Maybe it was stupid of me to do this, but before I saw that it screwed with the error screen, I put the game in my computer so I could browse the files using some of the toolkits.
Those are cool.
That's what I did. Being a PlayStation 1 game, most of the data is in proprietary format. And you're going to hate this, but I don't have a copy of these files, despite having a great opportunity to have copied everything to my hard drive. But interspersed in the game's files were hundreds of low-res images of ultrasounds.
Oh man, I know where this is going.
Huh?
That whole theory about the Giygas image.
What do you mean?
Especially when it's tiled like in the second phase of the final battle in Earthbound.
Oh yeah.
It looks like a fetus.
That.
On the game disc, there were image files you could read on your computer that weren't in the game.
I only played the first bit of the game for maybe an hour. No, these looked out of place. Black and white. Not stylized. They looked like just plain ultrasounds of babies at different stages of development. Nothing particularly special, except for the life of me, I didn't understand why on this game disc. On
the game disc, there were image files you could read on your computer that weren't in the game. Maybe someone at the game developer company had a twisted sense of humor and knew that about that urban legend.
Too early for that, fair, but also I don't think it's related, just coincidence. But like I said, other than what looked like Giygas showing up in the error screen after playing that game, my PS2 was fine. Ran pretty well until it wore out.
Hey, it's a fun story. No way to prove it, but I certainly found it entertaining. Thanks for doing this call with me.
No problem.
A few hours after that phone call, I received a text message from my acquaintance stating that she had contacted Jeannie about the game disc and inquired as to whether the disc was still around. At the time of the making of this video, I am trying to obtain some more information about the disc and perhaps some of the mysterious out-of-place images reported to have been on it. Since the disc itself would be unlawful to obtain, I have not requested a copy of the disc or any of its data. Currently, it is uncertain if this story is true at all. Everything in this video is a recreation based on hearsay. Could a game, even an unfinished one for an earlier generation of consoles, be able to change the firmware on a PlayStation 2? It seems unlikely.